Welcome to the podcast Our Journey Home. I'm here today again with Ellinor Hamrèn. So beautiful to have you back. We have landed in the creation of a space where spirituality and activism meet, and to explore what can that be and how can that look like, and who do we need to be to internalize both our spiritual part and our activism part. And today I feel so excited, might be the wrong word, but I feel excited to talk about the victim and the perpetrator, and especially connected with the stories about the witch trials and the and of course they weren't witches that were put on trial, but the women and men who were put on trial for being accused of being witches. Because I know that this has been a part of your journey and a part of the work that you have been doing. Can you share a bit about your journey with this process and this history that we have with us?
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, for me, it's this particular interest started, now I think it must be 3 years ago. And it happened when my father, who is a person who remembers a lot of things, he was taking his home village in Hälsingland, in sort of mid-north Sweden. He was guiding a bus tour for, I suppose, for the summer guests in the village, so to speak, or I think probably lots of people who come from the village took part as well, to talk about what's happened in the village in the past, who lived there, and because he remembers a lot of things, he remembers a lot of details. So I went on this bus trip, and I was sitting together with my cousin, and we were really enjoying it. Like we thought it was really great fun. And then I remember we came to a place in the village, and my dad said, and this over here is the place known as the Witch Heath. And this has been known colloquially in the village, but and then he told the story like it's like almost like a legend about this place, and how the witches were prosecuted there, and there was this the man who killed them with an axe, I think. An axe, is that English or is it Swedish?
No,
Yes, an axe. Yes. And then this is like legend. We don't really know this. There's no scientific proof of this. Although there are scientific proof about the trials. But we don't actually know if and how they were killed. We don't really know. Still. Anyway, so this caught I was like, wow. I felt like it was a spark inside of me, and I was like, oh. I need to, there's something with me about this, I just felt in my whole being that I need to do something about this somehow. And I can't remember how my thinking went then, because this is 3 years ago, and I remember I was also very sick at this time. I was very burned out, and I remember being quite tired in the bus ride, but I was like, I woke up, and I got like this sense of alert in my body. And then I can't remember exactly what happened. Sorry, I also, this was the summer before I went to a women's journey to Jokkmokk with a group of women from we were 48 women from all over Europe. And this was, we were going there on a women's journey called When the Women Drum to the North, or something like that. So it was about drums, and it was about witches. I mean, I got that when I'd been there. I was like, wow, this is something to do with the witch. Obviously, it isn't witches. It's about women's spaces and old women's culture that have been lost. So that's when this kind of witch interests really got sparked in me. And I remember that summer I was also reading a lot of books about witchcraft and things like that from various perspectives, not only the kind of academic perspectives, but also like how to be a witch kind of thing. Like more like the Wicca witch. It was like something that happened. that I wanted to explore. And what happened, if we fast forward to 2 years ago, I decided to what's the word? To hold a ceremony at this witch heath, basically. So I put an ad in our local village group and said that I am intending to do this ceremony to honor the women that were killed in the witch hunts in the 1600s. Who wants to join me? And then 30 women showed up.
Wow.
I didn't know, I think I knew 2 of them, but the rest were just like people who just came. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was very special. And my mom was in the group as well. She came with me, and we had a ceremony and a sharing about what kind of feelings this sparked in people. So this was 2 years ago. And then last year, what happened was that I decided to come back and do more ceremony on this place. And I actually lived in an old cabin. I don't remember how to say that in English. It's vallstuga, the old kind of fabo.
Yeah.
What's it called?
I'm not sure what it's called in English either, but where the women who held the cattle up in the north were living.
Yeah, one such place. So I lived there the whole summer, last summer, and I did a lot of ceremony on the witch heath, and also where I was living. And what came, when I felt that I need to be here this summer and I need to do this work, I didn't actually know exactly what it was, but it became apparent to me that this is about reconciling the victim and the perpetrator, and that we cannot just stay in the kind of victimized mode and blame the patriarchy or whatever, and point fingers towards the perpetrator. So that was a process that started for me last summer when I did this work, and I also felt a lot of anger towards patriarchy and a sense of like, I cannot forgive. I am so angry. This came up, and I didn't even know that I was holding those feelings inside. And so I am going to do a 3rd ceremony there later this month. And this is going to be my last ceremony, because I said I'm going to do this for 3 years and then I will stop it. So this time, and we've done it with only women the 2 past years, and this year I intend to open up the space for the men as well. So it's now we're kind of coming towards reconciliation. I'm also in a space right now in my life where I'm exploring my inner perpetrator. This is quite new, I will say, so it's a bit scary, although I have had memories, and that's also something that came up when we went to this Jokkmokk gathering, and I felt so guilty. I remember feeling so guilty, and I was like, wow, I think in the past life I've betrayed a sister, and I've sent her to death. So I feel so guilty, and I carry this guilt all my life, and I can't forgive myself. So that memory, it's a bit vague. I can't remember anything specific from a previous life, but I just have this kind of inner knowing that I've done something really ugly at some point, and I need to kind of make amends now. So I feel this great responsibility for doing the right thing now and to pay back something. Yeah.
And this touches me very deep, because I see the synchronization in that. In the end of in the beginning of this year, I was a part of releasing a Swedish book called Fireborn, eller Eldfödd, where I just knew I had to share one of my stories, and that's the story of the experience I had when I opened up the memories of also being a man in former life, and being the perpetrator in many different ways. Amongst them, I was one of the people who who condemned witches.
Mm.
And to tell that story has been one of the most challenging things in my life, especially because of the fear of being judged from the people that I consider my own people, from the people that I have around me in the spiritual world. It's, for me, I can see that it was easier to be the victim. It was a comfort in a way, and it might sound crazy, but it was, no one can blame the victim. But acknowledging my own inner perpetrator and both the things that I have done and the consequences they've had in past lives, and the things that I have done and the consequences they've had in this life. Because acknowledging that the old lives made it easier for me to see my inner perpetrator that I still carry with me, and in a sense that I think we all have. And starting to dive deeper into the role of victim and perpetrator, and seeing the wholeness of me, and starting to, and especially as we talked about last time, seeing the intention, even if my actions come sometimes from a good intention, they can have consequences that are devastating. And owning that, even though that wasn't my intention in the beginning, but owning it still, and in these past lives that I can see that even in the life where I condemned women who I thought was witches to death, I didn't do it from a place of trying to do something bad. I did it from a place of trying to do something good. I was trying to save the world from these women, because I honestly thought they were dangerous. And the journey of opening up those memories and allowing myself to feel all of those, that shame and that guilt and that pain, and forgiving myself for all that I've done and all that I am doing and all that I will be doing, because this for me is life. And the journey is not about being perfect. The journey is about taking responsibility. And as long as I don't allow myself to see and acknowledge the perpetrator in me, it's impossible for me to take responsibility for the actions that I take.
Yes.
So thank you so much for sharing that and for doing this work, both the inner work and the ceremonial work, and seeing it, because what I see when you talk about it is that the ceremonial work that you do is your activism here. It's a very forceful, practical, but still spiritual way of making the shifts that needs to be made, and healing the wounds that we walk with, so that something new can grow out of that.
Yes. Thank you for sharing as well. I know it's not easy. I wanted to say that also, when you said about how in the past life you thought you were doing something good because you honestly thought you were saving the world from the witches. When you say that, it's also because for me the witch hunts, I can kind of, there's so many things in there that I think around, and one of them is that they were scapegoats at their time. Yes. And that we as humans have a tendency to point fingers because we don't, it's uncomfortable to look at our own perpetrator, precisely because of that, because it's painful. It's so much easier to project and to find a scapegoat and say that they're the ones that are the bad guys, we are the good ones. And I mean, this is a dynamic. It's not about, it's always going to be the witches that are the scapegoat, or they're not only the ones that are the victims. That's just one particular form, that this dynamic has taken place at one particular time in history. So when we look at this in our present time, who are the scapegoats of our time? Who are the people that we point fingers at now, thinking we are the good ones and they are the bad ones, and being very justified in our perspectives? Like, so I think that this is a relevant. This dynamic is something we need to look at and learn from, so that we don't. Because I mean, the witch hunt, it was like a mass psychosis.
Yeah.
And I can see in our present time similar tendencies with other scapegoats and with other groups and with other people being so sure that they are the good ones, thinking they are doing the good thing, you know, from a place of, I'm not going to say from a place of innocence, but from a place of some kind of good intention, but not understanding that their good intentions are not necessarily translating into the positive or benign consequences that they are intending, because there's a lack of awareness somewhere in this process. And so I don't know if you want to say something. I had another thing, but you can.
I think I want to stay there for a while, because
for
me that is such an important part to see, that we learn from history and heal the history so we can start making other choices. And the last episode we talked a lot about my political childhood and where I grew up from. And one of the things that's one of the, I can see this in many different ways and many different parts, but one of the things that I see and what comes up when you talk now is how we point fingers at the politicians, for example, and saying it's their fault that we live in the society that we do, that and I'm not saying that politicians is not to be held responsible. Because there are politicians and it's their job, and holding them responsibility for that job, absolutely. But we also live in a democracy, so it's also we who put them there. And it's so easy, I see it's so easy for us to not take our own responsibility for the society that we have created together, and only say it's their fault over there. Because of the raising that I had and the environment that I grew up with, this is something that touches me so much, because in my world it's not the politicians over there. The politicians that decide is my father and his friends.
Yes.
So I know that they're human.
Yes.
And I've also lived with and grown up with this, with knowing that our family is threatened to life because of the work that my father does, and knowing that his intention comes from an enormously good place. He just wanna make the changes that we need to make.
I agree. It's also very triggering for me with this. I mean, we need to hold our leaders accountable, obviously.
Absolutely.
But in my world, like from my perspective, when I grew up being interested in politics, I saw the politicians as the change makers.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not all politicians are change makers. Some of them are something else. But the ones that I would engage with were the ones who were sacrificing their time and energy for precisely the same reasons as a lot of people in the spiritual community are in their field, to create a more beautiful world. And so in my understanding, I cannot really relate to this when I hear that people are making the politicians the bad guys, as a I mean, obviously it's about power, of course. There's a lot of corruption. Whenever there's power, there's going to be corruption.
Absolutely.
But you can't it's how to put it, it's we need to hold ourselves accountable as well as empowered people.
Yes.
And as long as we don't see ourselves as empowered people, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think that's this kind of, and I think a person who is feeling very disempowered will be more easily seduced into projecting and finding a scapegoat because that's the only way to make sense of the world. Something like that. I don't know. What do you think? Is that?
I can see that if we stand, and for me that is so much about what the spiritual journey is all about. It's about stepping into our own power, owning our history, and taking responsibility for our actions and the consequences they have. And from my spiritual point of view, what I see is that the politicians reflects us, because we have chosen them. So to say that it's their fault, it's really to give the power away, and say that I'm not taking responsibility for the part that I've been taking in that these people are here and making the choices. So for me, it's always about bringing it back to me and say, okay, who do I need to be for me to take responsibility and make the actions, because I can choose to be a politician if I want to. We all can, in theory. Not saying that all of us is meant to be, but we can all make the changes in our everyday life that we want to see and in ourselves. So it's also about recognizing the world outside of us as a reflection of ourselves and seeing how it reflects back on us. So seeing the politicians and the things that triggers us and frustrates us today, for me, is just seeing, okay, what do I need to work on in myself, and what kind of changes do we need to make in the culture? Because it's not, politicians will never change the culture. We will change the culture, and with changing the culture, the politicians will change.
It's both a bottom up and a top down process, obviously.
Yes.
So we need to own both of them, and to see that both are relevant. And some people we have different mission fields. So some people are working in a smaller kind of circle of perhaps family and close friends, whereas others have other mission fields. But we're all responsible for our own self and our own, the world in which we are operating, whatever that is. And whatever you're doing in life, to take ownership of where you are. I think that's very relevant. And I also wanted to touch on something else, which is going back to the witch hunts, that if we're talking about not only the mechanisms, when you detach the mechanism from the particular phenomenon, which is the witch hunts, but if we go to the witch hunts specifically and we talk about how female power has been feared throughout history. That's something that's been going on longer than the 1600s, obviously. So that's been going on for a couple of thousand years during the patriarchal era, and I feel like it's what we are doing now. You and I and people like us who are exploring this spiritual work, is to reclaim our intuition, among other things. But also, what for me, it's been interesting to recognize that, okay, so we've suppressed intuition for reason, or if you like, we've suppressed the feminine, the respect for the feminine principles, or the yin principles, for a long time, and we need to take them back so that there's going to be balance again. That's for me very clear. But to look at also that how intuition and the feminine power can be abused just as much as the other side, and that we are now at a very important historical juncture where we need to be responsible. We cannot do the same thing again, because intuition gone wild. That's precisely what happened. Because this is what I think is fascinating with the witch hunts, is that, okay, we are suppressing intuitive knowledge. Women knowing about herbs and things like that intuitively rather than scientifically, and things like that. The knowledge that women culture held. Okay, so but we are suppressing it. They were suppressing it through crazy intuition, because it was like, I feel that you are a witch. I think I've seen you in my sleep, and therefore you are going to be accused of. Because it's irrationality coming from intuitive claims, not logical ones. So we can see how it's kind of an abuse. It's like an abuse circle of the same thing. I don't know if this is logical now for people to follow. I hope that it's comprehensible. But what I'm getting at is that once we have reclaimed the intuition, we need to also apply logic. We cannot just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that we have done now knowledge, logic and patriarchal and structure and all these things, and now we're just going to get rid of it and have this feminine principle of flow and intuition and all these things, because when that goes wild, we don't have it's not safe. We don't have a safe container. And to recognize that the the position that has been in the victimhood can also, once you spin the wheel, they can also be a perpetrator, and that shift can be pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I feel personally that I am very careful about how to use my intuition. I want to be. I sometimes haven't been careful. I've been careless, and I can see the potentiality of abuse of my intuition very, very clearly. And a lot of people can't see that because they are still thinking that they are the victims. So they can't see themselves as the perpetrators, and I think that's a huge problem in our times.
What I hear in that is that we come back to the responsibility of it's not enough to have good intention. You also need to take responsibility for your actions and the consequences that they have. And I think what I hear you talk about basically is that it's not about one or the other. It's again. Because we talked about this last time too, that it's about an and. Both parts needs to exist for balance to be created, and it's interesting because the last book that I was a part of giving out, I shared a story about how I, in a former life as a female, abused my power and manipulated the circumstances with magic in a way that is not okay, because I changed something that was not supposed to be changed, and it had devastating consequences, maybe far worse than in the life as a man, and convicting witches. And for me, the work with my inner perpetrator is very connected with the work with the manipulative part of me, for example, because I can see how the feminine aspect can easily, with manipulation, can easily be a very destructive force, and seeing. And it's hard to put words on, and it's hard to touch upon, and I think that's just it, because it's so subtle. So it's not these huge things. There's subtle shifts in how we talk to each other, how we meet each other, how the stories that we tell. So for me, that part of me has been really hard to get a grasp of and take responsibility for, because the female destructiveness is a much more subtle one, but it can really put like an iron grip of the culture. In a family, in a workplace, in different community spaces. So being aware, and also bring that part of yourself home, to really start to see when do we engage from a place where it's toxic, even though it's come from good intention and intuition and flow. There can be like a poison in it, and then it shifts from the balanced female to the destructive, where it's about controlling, it's about manipulating, and it's about it's about ruling, basically. but from a female destructive part. So it's really not only healing, making this shift and healing from the patriarchy is really being aware of the wholeness of it, not only the big things that we can look at and touch upon, but seeing how we're all marinated in the patriarchic culture and how it seeps through all of it, and it's tough work, but it's truly super important.
Yes, it's difficult because it's always painful to see whenever one have abused one's own power. It's painful to look at, definitely. And when I hear you talking about manipulation, that's not something, I mean, I know that's the kind of classic feminine distorted power, if you like. I personally don't have much of that as an autistic person. It's not one of my superpowers to be manipulative. I have the opposite, but I have something else that I just realized now that you were talking, and I have never thought about that before. Or I have thought about it during the past few days, because I mean I'm entering this perpetrator space in me, but how I'm so curious that I sometimes I don't gossip from my lies, but I talk about things because I'm too curious about it, and I don't always respect people's, how do I say? I don't want to say that I don't keep secrets, because that's not really true, but I don't always respect people's integrity, I think, because I'm too curious about things. And that's something that I feel like, I mean, this is a new insight, obviously, so it's a bit vulnerable to talk about it, but it's something that I need to be working on. And I think that what it has to do with is that I have not been aware of it, first of all, and I have not implemented a kind of robust ethical framework that makes me not do so. And also because I haven't been in a position where I've been potentially abusing it in a way that can be really destructive. Whereas now, I mean, with both, I mean, increased awareness in general, but also taking kind of a leadership position in public spaces like I am now, as a kind of thought leader, if that's, I don't know if that's a good term, but that's how I would see myself, rather than a leader. It's more like a thought leader. That I need to be more responsible then, and to understand that, wait a minute, I have a lot of work to do in terms of ethics, to understand what could I potentially be contributing to, not out of my lies or with bad intentions, but out of ignorance or lack of awareness, simply. So I mean, it's a work about understanding that most people want to do good, but sometimes we fuck up, all of us, and we need to take responsibility for that, and we need to be able to look at ourselves and our own shadows,
and see that we all have those blind spots,
yeah,
where we don't see ourselves clearly, and it's an ongoing work all the time. I don't think that we are ever that there's ever a work that ends. I think it's something of keep being in the question of and the humbling of yourself, because for me it's so much about allowing myself to humble myself enough to actually kind of lift my perspective and see myself from the outside, and without judging myself. That's not because that's not it, because then you will just capsule up that part of yourself and try to ignore it, but humble myself enough to see myself from an outer perspective and say, hey, these parts, they still need some work.
Yeah.
We're diamond in the rough, and as a Westerner, as white, as a cis woman, as all of these things, it's there are a lot of different perspectives that I can't relate to, and it's a lot of work to start relating to those and start understanding from a deeper point of view. But for me, that's the work. That's the space where we can make the shift from a dominance and violence culture that we have created. And as a Westerner, we have created that into this world in many ways. And as to take responsibility for the occupation, for example, that we have done and still are doing in the world. So for me, that's highly spiritual, and that's the work I need to do to shift the culture in me into trust and peace instead of dominance and violence. And also see how I dominate and violate myself all the time, and understand how those things go together, that as long as I dominate and violate myself, I won't be able to give that peace and trust to someone else either. So once again, I come back to the humbleness of saying that there is so much to learn and there is so many things I don't know anything about. And when people who, for example, indigenous people who know things about those subjects, to actually listen.
Yeah, we need to listen. We need to learn to listen.
To listen, to stand still, to listen and to take in and say, maybe I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. Let's find out together.
Yeah.
Because that's what I think is the way to move forward.
I guess the first thing is just having an awareness of how I cannot access the perspectives. I cannot possibly access the perspectives that I don't have access to. And just knowing this, acknowledging this, is a good start, because I think a lot of people feel triggered by this idea, that this notion that, what do you mean? I understand what it's like to be oppressed. I am a woman. Yeah, but you don't know what it's like to be black. And that's, it's like, yeah, you can probably, I mean, we can try to empathize with our empathic ability, and we can try to put ourselves in others' shoes and so on, but we can never fully understand unless we've lived it. So to understand that and to cultivate this knowing that we need to listen to each other. And we've done some bad shit, in our lives. All of us. None of us are perfect angels, and that's okay. Yeah. That's okay. I mean, we, like you said, I like the fact that you said that we don't need to judge ourselves about that, because that's not leading anywhere. We need to forgive ourselves. We need to be able to forgive ourselves and make amends, so that we can learn and not do the same thing again.
And now we have a phone ringing.
Yes, I will just...
maybe that's the kind of call for that for this session, because I think that's a nice wrap up to see that humbling is what we need to do to also allow ourselves to see our inner perpetrator. Because if we don't allow ourselves to really stop and feel and listen, then I'm not sure it's possible to allow yourself to see that part of you, because it's so easy to run away and to try to hide from that part, because it's not nice. It's fucking hard work to embrace that part of you and love that part of you as well.
I think this might be a bit Christian languaging, but I just think this idea of the fact that nobody is irredeemable is a good it's a good thing to take on board, that nobody is irredeemable. We can all we're all welcome back, if you like, into the warmth of society. Nobody is gonna be an outcast, whatever we've done, even if it's something really, really, really terrible.
I think that's beautiful words to end with. Thank you so much for being here.